Eagleton's Criticism and Ideology, published in 1976, is a seminal work in the field of literary criticism and cultural theory. The book explores the relationship between literature, criticism, and ideology, delving into the ways in which ideology influences and shapes literary interpretation. Terry Eagleton, a prominent Marxist literary critic, argues that literary criticism is not a neutral or objective practice but is deeply intertwined with ideological assumptions and biases. He asserts that ideology is a set of ideas and beliefs that reflect and perpetuate the interests of a particular social group or class. Eagleton maintains that these ideologies are embedded within literary texts and are often reinforced or challenged through the act of criticism. In Criticism and Ideology, Eagleton critiques the prevailing literary theories of his time, including formalism and new criticism, for their failure to recognize the ideological dimensions of literature. He examines how various ideological frameworks, such as liberalism, conservatism, and Marxism, shape and inform literary interpretation. Eagleton argues that criticism should be aware of its own ideological positioning and strive for a more politically conscious and socially engaged approach to literature. The book's central thesis revolves around the idea that literature and criticism are not detached from the social and political realities of the world but are intricately connected to them. Eagleton highlights the importance of understanding the ideological underpinnings of both literary texts and critical practices in order to unveil the power dynamics and social implications at play. Overall, Criticism and Ideology challenges the notion of literature as a purely aesthetic and apolitical realm, asserting that it is a site of ideological struggle and contestation. Eagleton's work has had a significant impact on the field of literary criticism, encouraging scholars to engage critically with ideology and politics in their analyses of literature. In Criticism and Ideology, Eagleton expands on his analysis of the relationship between literature, criticism, and ideology by examining various theoretical approaches and their ideological implications. He critiques formalism, which emphasizes the intrinsic qualities of the text and downplays the role of social and historical context. Eagleton argues that formalist criticism fails to acknowledge the ideological biases that shape our interpretations and reinforces dominant cultural norms. He also discusses new criticism, a prominent literary theory of the time that focuses on close reading and textual analysis. Eagleton contends that new criticism, despite its emphasis on the text, still operates within an ideological framework by privileging certain types of literature and marginalizing others. He suggests that the canonization of certain works and the exclusion of others reflect the interests and values of the ruling class. Eagleton's Marxist perspective comes to the forefront in Criticism and Ideology, as he explores the influence of capitalism on literary production and interpretation. He argues that literature is not a detached realm of aesthetic enjoyment but a reflection of the material conditions and social relations of a given society. By analyzing the class dynamics embedded in literary texts and the ways in which criticism can reinforce or challenge dominant ideologies, Eagleton calls for a more politically conscious and socially engaged approach to literature. Moreover, Eagleton highlights the importance of understanding the relationship between language and ideology. He argues that language is not a neutral tool but is imbued with ideological meanings and implications. By examining the language used in literary texts and the discourses employed in criticism, he uncovers the underlying ideological assumptions and biases that shape our understanding of literature. Overall, Criticism and Ideology is a critical examination of literary criticism as a practice influenced by ideological forces. Eagleton encourages readers and critics to recognize and interrogate the ideological dimensions of literature, challenging dominant interpretations and striving for a more politically aware and socially transformative approach to literary analysis. Ideological dimensions of literature. Eagleton argues that literature is not divorced from ideology but is deeply embedded in it. He asserts that literary texts carry ideological messages and reflect the social, political, and economic conditions of the time in which they were produced. For example, George Orwell's novel, 1984, is often interpreted as a critique of totalitarianism and serves as a commentary on the ideological implications of state power. Criticism is an ideological practice. Eagleton critiques formalist and new criticism approaches for their failure to acknowledge the ideological biases inherent in literary criticism. For instance, new criticism's focus on close reading and analysis of the text alone disregards the social and historical context in which the work was written. By overlooking the ideological dimensions, new criticism tends to reinforce dominant ideologies and perpetuate the interests of the ruling class. The influence of capitalism on literature. Drawing from Marxist theory, Eagleton argues that capitalism influences the production and reception of literature. He suggests that literary works are shaped by the material conditions and social relations of the capitalist society in which they are created. For example, the works of Charles Dickens, such as Hard Times and Oliver Twist, explore the injustices and inequalities perpetuated by the capitalist system. Language is ideological. Eagleton highlights the ideological dimensions of language itself. He asserts that language is not neutral but is infused with ideological meanings and implications. For instance, the use of certain terms or discourses in literature and criticism can reflect and reinforce particular ideologies. The language of patriotism and national identity in Rudyard Kipling's poem, If, reflects and promotes a specific ideological worldview. Ideology and canonization. Eagleton discusses how the canonization of certain literary works and the exclusion of others reflect ideological biases. The selection of canonical texts is often influenced by the dominant cultural norms and values of a society. For example, the Western literary canon has traditionally marginalized the works of women, people of color, and non-Western authors, reflecting a Eurocentric and patriarchal ideological framework. Politics of interpretation. Eagleton argues that interpretation itself is a political act. Different interpretations of a literary work can reflect competing ideological positions and interests. For example, the interpretation of Shakespeare's play, The Tempest, as either a celebration of colonialism or a critique of imperialism reveals the ideological lenses through which the text is interpreted. In Criticism and Ideology, Eagleton's key points and examples demonstrate the intricate relationship between literature, criticism, and ideology, urging readers to critically analyze and challenge the ideological assumptions embedded within both the texts and the act of interpretation. Ideological dimensions of literature. Eagleton's emphasis on the ideological dimensions of literature encourages readers to recognize that literary texts are not created in a vacuum but are influenced by and reflect the social, political, and economic contexts in which they are produced. This analysis allows for a deeper understanding of the underlying messages and critiques embedded within literary works. Criticism is an ideological practice. Eagleton's critique of formalist and new criticism approaches challenges the notion that literary criticism can be purely objective and neutral. By highlighting the ideological biases present in different critical approaches, he prompts readers to question and interrogate the interpretive frameworks through which texts are analyzed. This perspective encourages a more self-aware and politically engaged approach to literary criticism. The influence of capitalism on literature. Eagleton's Marxist perspective draws attention to the impact of capitalism on literary production and reception. This analysis reveals how economic structures and class dynamics shape the content and themes of literary works. By examining the ideological implications of capitalism in literature, readers gain insights into the ways in which social systems intersect with creative expression. Language is ideological. Eagleton's exploration of language as an ideological construct underscores the significance of linguistic choices in shaping meaning and reinforcing or challenging specific ideologies. By examining the language used in literature and criticism, readers can unveil hidden assumptions, biases, and power dynamics. This analysis prompts a critical evaluation of the words and discourses employed in texts, leading to a more nuanced understanding of ideological undercurrents. Ideology and canonization. Eagleton's discussion of canonization illuminates how the selection and exclusion of certain literary works reflect ideological preferences and power structures. This analysis invites readers to question and challenge the traditional literary canon, encouraging a broader inclusion of diverse voices and perspectives. It emphasizes the need to consider the ideological implications of the texts we choose to celebrate and study. Politics of interpretation. Eagleton's exploration of the politics of interpretation highlights the subjectivity and contestation involved in analyzing literary texts. Different interpretations can arise from varying ideological positions, and understanding these interpretations allows for a more comprehensive engagement with the multiple meanings and perspectives embedded within a work. This analysis invites readers to critically examine the interpretive frameworks they employ and to consider alternative readings. In summary, Eagleton's Criticism and Ideology offers a thought-provoking analysis of the relationship between literature, criticism, and ideology. By drawing attention to the ideological dimensions present in literary texts and the act of interpretation, Eagleton encourages readers to critically engage with literature and consider the political implications and power dynamics at play. His work prompts a more self-aware and socially conscious approach to literary analysis. Ideological dimensions of literature. Eagleton's emphasis on the ideological dimensions of literature is a valuable perspective that encourages readers to consider the social and political contexts in which literary works are created. However, it is important to recognize that not all literature is explicitly driven by ideological agendas. While some texts may offer clear critiques or reflect specific ideologies, others may primarily focus on aesthetic or personal explorations rather than overtly advancing an ideological agenda. Criticism is an ideological practice. Eagleton's critique of formalist and new criticism approaches raises valid concerns about the potential biases present in critical practices. However, it is worth noting that criticism is a multifaceted and evolving field, encompassing various approaches and methodologies. While ideological biases can certainly influence interpretations, there are also critical approaches that strive for objectivity, rigorous analysis, and a nuanced understanding of texts. The influence of capitalism on literature. Eagleton's Marxist perspective sheds light on the influence of capitalism on literature, particularly in terms of economic structures and class dynamics. However, it is essential to recognize that literature can explore a wide range of themes and perspectives beyond economic systems. While capitalism may be a significant factor in some works, it is not the sole determinant of literary value or meaning. Language is ideological. Eagleton's examination of language as an ideological construct is a valuable contribution. Language does carry ideological implications, and analyzing linguistic choices can reveal underlying assumptions and power dynamics. However, it is important to avoid reducing literature solely to its ideological dimensions, as it encompasses a broader range of artistic and aesthetic qualities. Ideology and canonization. Eagleton's critique of canonization raises important questions about the exclusion of certain works based on ideological biases. However, it is crucial to recognize that the formation of a canon is a complex process influenced by multiple factors, including historical context, cultural reception, and artistic merit. While ideological biases may impact canon formation, it is also important to consider the enduring literary qualities and contributions of canonical works. Politics of interpretation. Eagleton's exploration of the politics of interpretation acknowledges the subjectivity and diversity of readings. However, it is essential to maintain a balance between recognizing diverse interpretations and engaging in rigorous analysis. While different interpretations may arise from various ideological perspectives, it is important to critically evaluate their coherence, evidence, and adherence to the text itself. In summary, Eagleton's Criticism and Ideology offers valuable insights into the relationship between literature, criticism, and ideology. While his perspectives highlight important considerations, it is crucial to approach his arguments critically and recognize that literature encompasses a wide range of themes, perspectives, and artistic intentions. A comprehensive analysis should incorporate multiple viewpoints and engage with the complexity of literary works.